I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Benjamin Hall, and this is Searching for Heroes. 25 years ago, in the African jungles of Sierra Leone, there was a young British soldier called Ian Getty who was taken hostage right in the middle of that country's civil war. He and his patrol from the Royal Irish Regiment, they drove into territory that was controlled by a militia that was known as the West Side Boys. They were ambushed, dragged into a village deep in the bush, and they were surrounded there by drugs, violence, mock executions, and the constant sense that perhaps any day could be their last. Now, when negotiations to release them finally broke down, Britain launched Operation Barras. It was this high-risk dawn assault by special forces in the Parachute Regiment, flown in by helicopter right into the middle of the militants' camp. It was fast, it was fierce, it was incredibly dangerous. 6 British soldiers and their Sierra Leonean interpreter were freed that day, but one British soldier, Lance Bombardier Brad Tinian, he was killed, and several others were badly wounded. Ian was saved that day. He was pulled out of the jungle. He was brought home. But as we're going to hear today and talk about as well, some of the mental scars stayed with him as well. Well, this year, a quarter of a century later, Ian went back. He returned to the same villages where he'd been held, and he described that journey almost as a way to face his demons, to confront what he'd buried for years, and maybe to reclaim something that had been stolen from him. Now, our theme at the moment in the series is saved, and today we're going to be looking at what it means to be saved, perhaps in body, but maybe still carry the battle in your mind. We're going to talk about the day of his capture, the cost of that rescue, the aftermath, and why going back really mattered. So, Ian Getty joins me right now, and Ian, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
It is a story that was such a big deal here in the UK back in 2000, almost in folklore, the rescue. And I wonder for our listeners if you could go back there and start at the beginning and talk about the moment that you were captured.
We went up to see the front line. We went actually to one of the UN camps, Jordanian UN. And on the way back, rightly or wrongly, we made the decision just to go up, to turn off and go and visit this sort of West Side Boys camp. And what we drove into was an ambush. So if you can imagine that it's like a thin track with thick jungle either side, probably one vehicle wide. The second we pulled into the village where it opens out, 100, 150, probably West Side Boys just surrounded the vehicles. Probably planned because they have what we sort of in the military call a cutoff. So they had a vehicle that came in behind us with a couple of anti-aircraft guns to stop our escape. And that went straight into a pretty hectic few minutes.
So did they grab you out? They pulled you out of your vehicle?
Kind of. We got out and it was a bit of a scuffle at the start. I always maintain they were kind of slightly confused as well about what was going on. So they were trying to get our weapons and getting told no for a few minutes, maybe a couple of minutes before the boss again and the sergeant major came round and told us to hand over the weapons to de-escalate the situation. So that was the point where sort of, it's really going downhill now as we handed over the weapons. Very quickly after that, a UN helicopter came over the top, which kind of freaked them out a bit. And they made the decision pretty much, probably within an hour of the ambush. They took us down to the river, loaded us into sort of canoes, and took us across to the other village on the other side of the Rokel Creek, Barrybanna. And that was kind of the start of the next 17 days.
Wow. And so you were held by the West Side Boys for 17 days. What was it like when they were, when you were being held? How were they treating you? What were the conditions like?
It was up and down, just a bit of a roller coaster. So I always say a few things. Firstly, I always say physically it wasn't that bad for us compared to Musa, who was our Sierra Leone liaison officer. He was very badly tortured and beaten. For us, probably apart from the odd event, it was mostly mental. And then
When you say mental, what sort of things were they doing to you to really hurt you?
the mock executions were the worst, which I don't know how many of those happened.
Was that just
But
taking people, putting them on the ground, and going the whole way?
but what they would do is they would number you off 1 to 6. So yeah, on your knees, as you say, and come up with some kind of ludicrous demand they had that you couldn't possibly have anything to do with. It could be. I think the one I always remember is they wanted Tony Blair to do something within the next 30 minutes. And they would start shooting. And so it was things like that, and they would number you off. And kind of then, yeah, you'd spend the next 30 minutes waiting for the bang, I suppose. It never came, largely down to a lot of the guys we had with us, sort of the boss and the senior ranks, who always managed to come up with some kind of plan to distract them or get them out of there. And that was something about them. They were quite easily distracted.
So were you guys also then talking about, did anyone talk about trying to escape? Were you guys ever planning that?
We did. So later on in the captivity, when they moved us to another building, it was down near the river, and we asked to go and be able to wash in the river, basically. And we did. And one night, I remember the guards sort of walked off, and the boss said, "Let's go in the river, let's swim." And I've talked about this a lot of times. There was almost a sense of panic because we hadn't psyched ourselves up to be ready to go. And we actually said at that point, let's not do it now. Let's go back and plan it a bit and be more prepared. So just wee silly things like we got some old water bottles and kind of tied our shoelaces to them and to try and make floats. Like Baywatch style.
Yeah.
Floats. But we just never got the chance again. We had looked at other things, in the initial building. There was bars on the windows. We had a half-hearted attempt to see if we could sort of cut through them, but the noise was too much. So yeah, and it was something we thought about and something we planned for. We just never really got the chance. And actually, even if we'd done it, actually getting back to somewhere safe would have been a hard task.
Yeah. How are you doing sort of mentally while you're during those 17 days, you're being held hostage? Were you, I mean, I don't know, I can't describe it. Was the adrenaline high? Were you focused on what you can do? Were you feeling the fear all the time? Could you sleep? Like what was it like mentally when you were being held?
Yeah, it was tough. And like I say, it was a bit of a roller coaster. There was a lot of times where nothing was happening, which sounds good, but that's a lot of time just sitting thinking. And then every day you'd be waiting for the point where they, I always say we called it the witching hour or something. There'd be a point in the day where they lost their minds, and it would be mock executions, or it could be anything.
So tell me about then the day itself, or the night itself, which you didn't know was coming. So all of a sudden, what happened? You heard helicopters?
So we woke up and heard helicopters, which is bad because we've sort of, I've said it 1,000 times, we'd already decided on day one, or the West Side boys had demanded, any helicopters that come over, we're getting killed. And I remember we woke up, we could hear the helicopters in the distance. And then we heard them sort of turn away. and it was like they just turned away slightly and then just came charging back at the village. It's a weird one because in my mind, and I always say this, it took about 30 seconds between us hearing the helicopters and gunfire starting. It wasn't. I think it's about a 7 or 8 minute flight to get there. So there's a whole bit of my memory that's completely missing.
But you might only have heard the helicopters as soon as they reached you. Isn't that right?
Well, we heard them. We could hear them way in the distance. So they were sort of where they were taking off from, essentially, which was about 8 minutes away. But we could hear them. And yeah, like I say, 7, 8 minutes. In my mind, it was about 30 seconds. But the next thing I knew was we heard the sound of the gunfire. So I believe it was one of the helicopters that sort of the door gunners were opening up, and that was the helicopter that kind of came in with the guys to come in and get us.
The helicopter came down middle of the village before, and almost straight away, someone's at the door, opens up, and it's what, SAS?
Apparently, we'd been trying to barricade the door to stop the West Side boys getting in, and at this point there'd been guys on the ground in the jungle, our guys, who had come in before the helicopters.
So the Barras came in the jungle, and then the sort of SAS came in on the...
No, it would have been the SF guys in the jungle. But they had already started the fight. Again, I can't remember hearing it, but yeah, they were there. But essentially the helicopters turned up. I think there was 2, so they landed at both ends of the village, and obviously one of them just right outside our building, and this guy came and kind of kicked the door in, basically. Weirdly enough, we'd heard that the West Side boys couldn't get in because they lost the key to the padlock, so that kind of saved us a bit. But yeah, this guy turned up at the door and essentially just very calm and sort of says good morning and keep your heads down for a bit.
And you hear gunfire all around you, and this guy very calmly, SAS, comes up to the door and just says, "Hey, morning guys, gonna get you out of here."
Basically that. He said, just wait, we need to do some stuff. And we did. I mean, I say we were waiting, it wasn't that calm. We were sort of on the ground, because there was a lot of bullets going about, both ways. And yeah, for us, it was just a case of waiting then for, I think it was about 45 minutes before we eventually got put on the helicopter and taken out. And the helicopter we went on had a lot of casualties from the Barras that had been picked up on the other side in Magbenny village. So it shows you how quickly and sort of how fierce that fight was. That, they were already bringing casualties out within 45 minutes. So yeah, that was kind of it. It was, we didn't see a lot of it.
Yeah, but you certainly heard it. You felt what it was like, I'm sure. What did it feel like in that one moment where you were put on the chopper and you finally took off, and that one moment you knew you were safe, you were saved? Was there a feeling of elation?
There's 2 things I'd say on that. The first was just before we went on the helicopter, we were taken to another building just to wait a bit closer to where the chopper would come in. And I always remember Musa, the LO, panicking. He knew the West Side boys personally as well, from his time in the army. And he said they're going to counter-attack and kill everyone. And I always say that was the point I knew we were right. I've never been so confident in my life that the West Side boys definitely weren't going to win. Once we actually got on the chopper, it was almost straight back to work. Like I say, the para casualties were on there. So we were grabbed to help, I don't want to say treat them, but help with the treatment. So, bandages or holding a drip or something like that. And it was literally straight back to work on the back of the chopper.
Huh. And it's interesting because then I wonder, at that point, and you've spoken sort of about how what happened that day really has stuck with you, and it sort of, you know, left you with some sense of PTSD, perhaps. Like, what was that like? Did that start to grow? Did you start to think back to the day or to when you were held? And like, so what happened in the aftermath of all this?
Well, pretty quickly straight back to work. I think we had 2 weeks off.
Oh,
And
and then
then
you were back to the barracks and
back to work, yeah. So I went on a promotion carter, I think, the next month or the month after. I'm back to work. And I did another 13 years after that. So it was pretty much just straight back into it. In terms of the mental health stuff, I was pretty much okay at the time, I think. I've always said any difficulties I had later on, which I did in Ukraine and places like that, I'm not sure Sierra Leone contributed. I think it was such a unique story, and I told it so many times in so many pubs over the years that that kind of worked as like an unofficial therapy for me.
that is therapy. Like I feel the same way. Like
Yeah.
even if you're just saying it to your mate or to someone you just seen, by talking about it, that's the number one rule of therapy. Just talk about it. Keep talking about it, and that helps.
It's exactly that, I think, for me. So I genuinely think, surely, if a psychologist came to see me and whatever sort of is going on in my head, they probably would jump straight to Sierra Leone as a big factor. But I never felt that. I felt I got a lot more damage, maybe isn't the word, but a lot more issues from places like Afghan, Ukraine, Iraq, all the usuals.
Yeah. Because you've been out. You've been out then numerous times at some of the places. But what took you back to Sierra Leone? Why did you decide you had to go back? What were you trying to finish or close? Because I've seen interviews where you've said that, that you were also there to get rid of demons.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it a few times, my sort of main issue over the years was Brad dying, because that was kind of 25 years of thinking, was that our mistake that got Brad killed?
I get that he died whilst saving you, and I imagine that has some really complex ideas about, well, was it worth it?
Yeah, it was, but I think, I mean, that was my number one demon that stayed with me just from Sierra Leone. I think in general it was good just to go back and kind of, how would you say, maybe to test yourself and make sure you could get back and see it. And after coming out of Ukraine, which that was 4 years ago now, and having sort of been sitting in the comfort of my own home, to get back out there and make sure you could still sort of do it a bit and make sure all those demons from the whole sort of 20 plus years career wouldn't stop you. And it worked. It was a fantastic trip. Just to get out and see Sierra Leone and how different it is.
Yes, showing yourself, something that you needed to know you could keep after you've left the service in the military. You need to show that you could keep living, keep doing things, and that's what that was about.
Yeah, definitely a part of that. And yeah, just to face that, there was no specific fear. I was never lying awake at night thinking about Sierra Leone, but just to face that and actually go back out and demons maybe isn't the word. Apart, there were certain things in my head, but maybe just to put that full stop on it.
Yeah.
Because it sort of happened, and then we left very quickly. Everybody went their separate ways. We never saw the guys from the rescue team. And it was a bit weird. It very quickly was back to normal, but you haven't actually sat down and addressed it. I remember, I think we did an hour of counselling after it. And where they talked about, some psychiatric nurse was asking me about my childhood. There was nothing mentioned about Sierra Leone, and being young and stupid, I just thought, I'm not going back to that. So yeah, I think it was just a way to put a bit of closure on it, because it's a pretty significant event, but it happened and then it was forgotten about. Maybe not the word, but it just life went on, and we'd never come back to it in a proper way.
Maybe that's the best way to get through some sort of traumatic moments. Instead of sitting there and thinking about it and worrying about it, just keep living, just keep doing something else. Like, that helps heal as well. So talk about it like you were doing in the pub. Talk about it to your mates, but keep living, keep doing things, and it never really hurt you that much perhaps because of those reasons.
I think the talking about it, I think because it was such a unique story that they dragged the conversation out of you. I actually got bored telling the story after a while, but I think that probably was that might have really, really worked. And it's a good message to put out there, because there's plenty of stuff I haven't told the stories about, which is probably what came back to haunt me sort of 4 years ago. But you hear it all the time. You got to talk about it.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes. We'll be right back after this.
What I want to finish up talking about is, helping veterans who have served like you have for many, many years, but then what happens when they leave the military? And I know you feel strongly that not enough is done in that space.
There's so much more that could be done. There's so many good organisations out there, but they're particularly the smaller ones that are really, really grafting to help veterans, but they're underfunded and stuff. It's a constant battle to kind of keep that going.
Important just to remember that these are people who have risked their lives for our freedom and our democracy and fought for the country, and that we should be there, for everything.
I don't want to get all political, but I worked for the government in Ukraine, and came back home with some serious mental issues, and was kind of told, what do you want us to do? Any help I got was through, luckily I had a really good GP. I had a couple of local charities who I still sort of keep in touch with and help out with. But
what happened in Ukraine that was sort of so negative?
So Ukraine, to give a bit of context, I was out there for about 5 years-ish, from 2017. So working with an organisation that monitored what was the contact line then back in Donbass. There's not a specific incident. It was relatively safe, to be honest, compared to everything I've done. But I started to feel ill. So I'd be going on these easy patrols, and my heart would be racing. And just this kind of anxiety. Well, it was anxiety. And weirdly, then I found out that anxiety, actually, you can feel it. It feels like you can't breathe. It's not just panic in your head. I was not feeling well. But I hung on in there because the money was good. And I probably did about 4.5 years longer than I should have. I always tell the story. I think I know the exact day when the switch went in my head. So I'll try and keep it brief. But I'd been there a few months, and they started setting up these drone teams. And I thought, I'll have a piece of that. It sounded interesting. I'd never flown a drone in my life. But I applied anyway, and somehow miraculously got the job. And I think on the Thursday I moved into the new team. And on the Saturday or Sunday, my old patrol was hit by a landmine, and the medic was killed. And I remember sitting that night and just thinking, something switched in my head. I thought, I can't dodge any more bullets. Sierra Leone, I've not mentioned, but about 4 months after Sierra Leone, I broke my neck in a training accident, which should have killed me. I had this thing with the mine. I had whatever happened in Afghan and Iraq, and I just thought, I can't have many lives left. And this anxiety just built and built for years. Then, up to the point where I was sort of self-medicating out there with. I've got some pretty hard beers out there that can take the edge off. But eventually, wasn't working. I was starting to get panic attacks and stuff. Up until the point where one day I just sort of cracked, we hit rock bottom. Now I spoke to a group called Rock to Recovery pretty quickly, who are fantastic outfit. But I was obviously evacuated or brought home by the government. And it was, any treatment or help was pretty non-existent. I went on sick leave, but there wasn't a lot done.
And that's the point that you've told them. You've been very clear. You've said, I'm having these panic attacks. I need help. And there was no help given.
Yeah, it was. I'm not sure if it felt like they didn't know what to do, or there just was nothing. It was, see out your 6 months sick leave and then we'll terminate your contract and go your way. And honestly, I think possibly the welfare woman who dealt with me resigned after that, because she was sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, really trying to help, but there was very little she could do. So I ended up with a couple of charities. Like I say, my GP was brilliant. That was 2021, so COVID was still ongoing. Yeah. But he was able to meet the GP who helped me out, and then I went through a couple of charities. But again, you have to roll through these charities because the funding's so tight, and there's so much pressure on them that they'll say to you, "Look, we can give you 10 sessions of treatment." But then we have to move on to someone else. So they were all brilliant, but it's tough.
Yeah. Well, how are you doing now?
Yeah, I'm good now. I'm good. I'm enjoying working at home, not being away, and doing as much as I can at the minute to help veterans as well. There's plenty out there you can be doing.
Yeah.
We've sort of spoke that we're working on helping veterans with different claims at the minute. So that's work. And then we've got some other stuff going on with one of the charities that I sort of went through at the start. So I guess it's peer support groups that they're setting up.
I suppose you're a perfect person really to be involved in that because you know what it's like on the other side. You've gone through the journey yourself. And so you're someone who can really say what is needed.
That's exactly how it works. The peer-to-peer support groups are fantastic because, you get people in some quite bad conditions with their mental health, but there's always someone there that's been through it.
So are you sitting down now sometimes with people who are having, PTSD or some mental issues, and you're helping them through now or talking to them?
It's quite, not in any official capacity. We get together sort of kind of like we just get in a room and we'd have a brew. And then we sort of have a format where everyone gives a score out of 1 to 10, how they're doing. Mm. And then we just go around the room. And, if people are really struggling, it could be anything, mental health, but it could be whatever, any issues. There's always someone in there that's been through it. So, it could be anything from, people quite seriously struggling with their mental health, where you give them help. Someone will have guidance on someone to call or someone you can speak to. And, the same with work at the minute as well. We get people on that come on to do a basic claim and maybe sometimes struggle. But it's just a case of passing them on to, here's some organisations that you can get in touch with and putting them onto the right ones because, again, a lot of it is just knowing where to go. It's like a lot of them are probably the same as I was when I came back from Ukraine, expecting to help, and suddenly nothing's happening. It's just a way to get information out there, and sort of it's another step, I think, because it doesn't seem to be going away. The numbers are pretty scary for soldiers at the minute. I think we're still paying the price for Afghan and Iraq and a few other bits and pieces we did in around there.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes. We'll be right back after this.
So I suppose just to close up today, first of all, what would you say to someone who is going through those sort of things themselves and is looking for help? What should they do? And then what can our listeners do to help in any way as well?
Well, what they should do is just, Google someone. It doesn't need anything. The Samaritans, Rock to Recovery, Combat Stress, a local charity. Just let someone know. Even if they can't help, they'll guide you. So these sort of little local charities are very good at sort of moving you around and guiding you where you need to be. But it's said over and over and over again. It's becoming quite a big thing. You've got to reach out.
Yeah, talk.
And you have to just say, look, I'm struggling here.
And then for your listeners, what's the best way they can help?
The easiest way is, look, I'll be honest, I'm sitting here with a sort of Help for Heroes t-shirt on, which I stole off my brother. But he'd be big on things like, he'd buy a hoodie because the funds go back in. Buy a bit of merchandise or donate somewhere. There's always a way, and funding's always, I think that's critical for most charities.
Totally, because there are loads of people just like yourselves who are there and who want to help, but if there isn't a single, a pound or dollar to help them, they can't do it. So funding needs to be there to help, to allow people to help.
There's so many ways to do it. You'll have seen yourself, there's a lot of people out there doing various challenges and charity stuff. So there are people raising money, but if it's as simple as, going on I'll pick one random, like Combat Stress website and buying a hoodie, that then puts money back in, or a local charity, just, there's so many out there, but just get to know them. And if you can put a couple of quid in, every penny helps with the real good ones, especially the local ones.
Yeah, you are. All right. Well, look, Ian, thanks so much for talking to me today. Thanks for sharing your story. And I suppose more than anything, thanks for now passing it on, for helping others, for helping other people get through, what you've experienced yourself.
No problem. It's been a pleasure to be on it. And if I can get any sort of awareness out there, I certainly will.
Well, fascinating to hear Ian's story, and I'm pleased he can join us. That is Operation Barras, the rescue in Sierra Leone, was a really big deal in the UK. It was our special forces and paratroopers, Paras, who went in and saved the day. And so fascinating to hear from someone on the other side who was being rescued. But I suppose most interesting is that he was left with no sort of PTSD or anything traumatic after that event. He got back to work. He was straight back in the military, and he was talking to everyone about what happened and what perhaps a good model that might be to getting through things. Instead of sitting there and not talking about it and brewing over it, just get back to work. Keep your mind focused on doing things. Keep talking about it. And maybe that is just the most simple way of getting through something so difficult. And then if you are suffering with some kind of PTSD, as Ian later was after Ukraine, and many deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq as well, then reach out to someone who's gone through the same. That's the best place to start. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks for listening to Searching for Heroes. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.